What's up, YouTube? This is 2 Raw 4 TV. So, Rick Barry, who is the only player in the history of sport to lead the NCAA, the NBA, and the ABA in scoring, 1975 Finals MVP, one of the most prolific, one of the most aggressive scorers the game has ever seen, who was able to transform his game from being a primary scorer to being a more well-rounded facilitator and toward the end of his career, a def defender, and then ended up being more or less a spot up shooter for the Houston Rockets. But anyway, throughout his career, he scored 25,000 points when you include the ABA. Great Hall of Fame career. Once was considered one of the top three small forwards in the history of the game, or the three Bs: Bird, Baylor, and Barry. But anyway, he's not a fan of today's game. All right, he went on a huge rant recently about how even though today's players are great athletes and he admires that, he thinks that they're getting away with murder as far as what they're able to do in games. He said, and quoting him, let's see, he said, "Stop the traveling, stop the carrying of the ball, stop the moving screens. Call the damn game according to the rule book because players will adjust. If you're going to allow them to get away with it, well, of course they'll keep doing it. Call the game according to the rule book." And he went on to say that the players, they're breaking the rules. It's pathetic. For me to watch this game the way I was taught how to play the game, to watch this, what they're allowed to let go, it's an embarrassment. And look, I was not alive when Rick Barry was in his prime. Um, I've only read about what you could do back then. They already had loosened the rules in a lot of ways by the 1990s. But I've seen obviously a regression in the officials calling the game as far as keeping players in check as far as going out of bounds, no pun intended, when it comes to the rules. I hear, there's less traveling violations, moving screens are not called enough. To me, another one they don't call enough now is offensive fouls. I think a lot of times when these offensive players are committing offensive fouls, but they don't call it. But yeah, the carrying the ball, I keep trying to tell people, younger people, oh man, Rick Barry, hey, no. When you look at footage of these guys and you're saying, oh man, see, they can't do what they do with the ball. They couldn't do it, you dumb bitch. How many times I gotta keep trying to tell you motherfuckers? They couldn't do back then what these guys are doing today. Now I'm not saying that if left unchecked, Rick Barry would be dribbling like Kyrie Irving. I'm not saying it. Guys had crossovers back then. You ever look at old footage of guys balling in Rutgers Park when they're playing street ball? They did a lot of the shit they're doing today. But you couldn't do it in the NBA. The NBA was a more conservative game. One of the things that allowed players to be able to slowly begin to do more and more what you would call popular or street moves was the influence the ABA had on the NBA. The ABA was more above the rim play. You saw more athletes in the ABA, more high flying dunks, guys showing more of their creativity and originality. And that did influence the NBA to start loosening the rules when it came to certain shit. You know, they weren't calling palming and carrying every single time. Certain signature stars got away with doing certain shit. Remember, all the way back in the 50s, they were letting Bob Cousy get away with palming and carrying all fucking up and down the court. Why? Because he was box office and because he was a star. Vern Mickelson, the Hall of Fame power forward with the Minneapolis Lakers during the Mikan dynasty, wrote about that in his autobiography. Um, when he was older. He wrote an autobiography, and he talked about how the Minneapolis Lakers complained about how Bob Cousy was able to do certain shit and nobody else could do it. Now, part of it, like I said, is because when you're a star, you're allowed to do certain things on the court that other people aren't. But at least back in the day, it was more subtle. There were times when Michael Jordan got away with offensive fouls and traveling, but at least it was not as obvious. You know how many times I've seen LeBron James travel? And I mean obvious travels. So I understand where Rick Barry's coming from, man. I do. That's the nature of the game today. And that's why I find it incredulous when a lot of people want to compare the players of the day to players of the past. You can't do it because the players in the past, yeah, you could say they weren't as athletic. Um, in some instances, they weren't as skilled. But Rick Barry will tell you, give me a guy that can understand the game of basketball on an IQ level. Give me a team with a bunch of high IQ players who can play very good or pretty good to very good versus a team with two superstars and or three superstars and a bunch of role players, and their basketball acumen or IQ isn't that great. The team with the high basketball IQ is probably going to win 8 out of 10 times. So I understand where Rick Barry is coming from, man. I agree with him. Even though I watch basketball, but I don't enjoy the game like I used to. It's definitely part of what Rick Barry is talking about. Another part of it is just the style. The way they play the game today is just not that enjoyable. But anyway, tell me what your take is on this. Do you agree with Rick Barry, or do you think he's out of bounds? Because I agree with him.